or not.
Well, good morning, and thank you for your demonstrable love of USF by inviting me.
It's our love of you, Ralph.
Would you like me to speak from here, or?
Wherever you are most comfortable. We actually have a lot of web viewers today, so if you guys don't care, if that works, great.
And Governor Perez, I had one comment. Also, some other student government members from USF are currently driving down, and they might have comments or questions you might want to ask them as well. Would it be okay if they may be called in at a certain particular time?
Boy, I would really not want them driving and calling through the rainstorm.
Okay, just asking.
Governor Franklin.
Thoughts on that?
Do we know?
But then James Scott is here as well, who is the student body president from their St. Pete campus.
We did have, we realized a little bit of a full start this morning out of Tampa, and I think one student upon whom others were relying for transportation didn't show up. So we're fortunate that we do have a student government president from our USF St. Petersburg campus, and three other students, two that have intimately been involved with the Global Experience Fee, and another one intimately involved in the green fee from the Tampa campus that can address questions.
You seem well armed, Ralph.
Well, again, good morning, Chairman Perez, Chancellor Brogan, members of the Board of Governors. This morning, I'm bringing before you a request to implement two new fees at the University of South Florida. As you've seen, a Global Experience Fee and a Green Energy Fee. I am going to take a moment and invite the four students that are joining me to briefly introduce themselves, their names, their majors, and again, their relationship to the two fees that we're presenting. So James, if you'd like to go first.
All right, good morning. My name is James Scott. I'm an environmental science and policy major. I graduate in December of this year from USF St. Petersburg. When I began attending USF St. Pete back in January 2008, this initiative was being debated, and it was an idea that students supported back then. It has been years in the making. Carissa took this initiative up on the Tampa campus, and we've been coordinating with her for about a year now. So my involvement has been developing a support for this initiative throughout the USF system among the four branch campuses, and I represent USF St. Petersburg, but I have worked to discuss this issue with the entire USF system and the student body throughout, and that's my role.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carissa Gerke. I'm a senior at USF Tampa. I'm a biology major, environmental policy minor, and I'm the president of Student Environmental Association on campus, and I've been involved with work on the green fee since 2008. First at the state legislature and now at the Board of Governors.
Thank you, Carissa. Ryan?
Yes, hi, my name is Ryan Walsh. I'm a senior at USF Tampa, and my major is history. I spent a year as an exchange student in China where I went to university.
Excuse me one second. Do we have a microphone problem with?
Can you pass that? Yes. You don't have it. There you go.
No.
Okay. Shall I start over, sir?
No, I think we heard it. I just want to make sure others could hear. But go ahead.
Okay. And after returning from China, I have worked at the USF Education Abroad Office. I'm a strong proponent of the Global Experience Fee. I actually have a lot of students who come to our office and they ask me about going to China, and a lot of times the funding is just not there. Just under 30% of USF students, of course, are on Pell Grants. And some programs are substantially expensive, but they offer just great opportunities, and it really just, it breaks my heart whenever students just don't have those funds available.
And Amanda?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Amanda Torsey. I'm a senior at the University of South Florida at the Tampa campus. I'm an interdisciplinary social science major with a minor in leadership studies. And I was fortunate enough to spend last semester during the fall at Anglo-American University in Prague, Czech Republic. And currently, upon returning to the University of South Florida, I'm trying to engage students in a new program that will go to Prague this summer, and working with them through the challenges and the obstacles that they have to overcome to apply and have that experience for themselves.
Well, thank all of you for being here and taking time. I know this is not your normal student thing to do. Ralph.
Well, we're also joined by other student supporters of both fees, those who do not have academic obligations at this time. Of course, along with leaders from our USF World, which is our comprehensive internationalization office at the University of South Florida, as well as from our Office of Sustainability. So let me get straight into the fees. In accordance with Board of Governors Regulations 7.003, we're requesting authority to implement these two new fees effective fall of 2011. Both proposals have been carefully reviewed and approved by the USF Board of Trustees. Each fee supports an important strategic priority for the university, priorities that are not covered by other fees. And because they are mandatory, I think it's important to point out that both fees would be covered by financial aid. The Global Experience Fee is a $10 per semester flat fee paid by all students and supports the university's goal of enhancing global literacy and impact. USF's strategic plan calls for a significant increase in the number of USF students who annually engage in a global education experience, from about 1% currently to 5% within the next couple of years, including study abroad, international field-based clinical experiences, global research activities, particularly for graduate students who will be paying this fee, along with community engagement and service learning overseas. Like existing required fees, such as athletics, health, and financial aid fees, all students are eligible to benefit from this fee, though some may choose not to. Growing out of a USF Student Committee recommendation in 2008, and framed around what is a very, very successful international education fee that's implemented across public universities in Texas, the Global Experience Fee is focused on student success through enhancing retention and graduation rates and helping our graduates become more competitive in the global marketplace. Revenues from the fee will be returned directly to our students in the form of primarily need-based scholarships to offset the additional cost of study abroad. As you'll see in your packets, I believe, USF presently falls short of the number of students participating in study abroad compared to our peers, a reality that is attributable in large part to the high proportion of Pell recipients enrolled at the University of South Florida. Nearly 1/3 of our students are Pell recipients. Study abroad participants across the United States are overwhelmingly women, white, and wealthy. In fact, just 35% of study abroad participants are men, 81% are white, and this initiative, of course, is intended to dramatically widen participation in meaningful educational and life-changing global experiences for all students at the University of South Florida. We continue to hear from our students and from prospective employers alike that global experiences are essential to their academic success and future placement, as well as to enhancing Florida's economic competitiveness and growth. I should add that Florida as a whole lags the rest of the nation in the number of students participating in study abroad. National data shows that while we're one of the largest systems of higher education in the United States, we fall 13th in the nation in terms of the number of students that actually study abroad. And we happen to believe that that's going to have a significant impact on Florida's ability to compete in the global marketplace. None of us, I think, it's fair to say, none of us want socioeconomic status to limit our students' opportunities or to unfairly put them at a competitive disadvantage upon graduation. Guided by a student and faculty committee, performance accountability related to the Global Experience Fee will be monitored using the Institute for International Education's annual Open Doors report and student surveys including the cross-cultural adaptability inventory. So that's my overview of the first fee. Would you like me...
Go ahead and do the green fee, Ralph, and then we'll ask questions about both of them.
The green energy fee is a $1 per credit hour variable fee, again paid by all students, and supports the University of South Florida's goal to establish a strong and sustainable economic base in support of the university's growth. As a founding signatory of the American College and University President's Climate Commitment in 2008, USF's resulting Climate Action Plan calls for a reduction in energy costs and a lowering of greenhouse gas emissions. Again, it's a student-driven initiative, and we do have letters of commitment in transit from Tampa that I'll be happy to share with you, letters of commitment from presidents of student government. But a student government or student-driven initiative, revenues generated from this fee will be used to complement and accelerate continuing improvements such as installing more sunscreens and tints on south-facing windows, more state-of-the-art climate control sensors, energy-efficient roofs, and solar trees on top of buildings. Annual investments will be guided by a student-faculty committee, and performance will be tracked utilizing the Sustainability Tracking Assessment and Rating System, otherwise known as STARS, which is administered by the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, ASHE. Following 3 years of implementation, a student referendum will determine return on investment of this fee and whether to continue it in years forward. In summary then, together the Global Experience Fee and the Green Energy Fee will add just $50 annually to the current $1,667 paid by students, paid in fees by full-time resident undergraduate students at the University of South Florida, again representing in totality 32% of the tuition plus fees. I think at this time I want to thank you for your consideration. I'll be pleased to address any questions you may have on either of the two fees.
Great. Let's take these one at a time for questions. I have numerous questions on both, but let me open the floor to the committee. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the Global Experience Fee first, since it's first up. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
Question.
Governor Franklin.
Thank you. In reference to the available opportunities, I guess, for study abroad, and in reference to the amount of students that want to go, what's the difference between the two normally? And then how many of those applicants aren't able to receive resources to be able to study abroad? And then, well, I'll ask a follow-up to that, sorry.
Well, let me address that to start with. Each year we provide about 45, a pretty broad array of 45 study abroad. And remember, study abroad is just part of the broader picture. We're also looking at service learning abroad opportunities, research experiences abroad. But you asked about study abroad, about 45 different programs that head out to Europe, to Asia, to Africa, throughout Latin America, and the Caribbean. Unfortunately, in recent years, we've had to cancel some of those opportunities through really the lack of ability on the part of so many of our students to pay the additional costs. Now, the tuition rates remain the same as paying on their home campus. The fees remain the same, but the additional costs brought about by transportation and living overseas, as well as lost earnings. Many of our students work as they attend school or attend university at the University of South Florida. When they leave for a prolonged period of time, they're losing those earnings as well. So we need to find a way to offset the additional costs.
And then, I'm sorry.
I'd invite either of our most capable students to address those questions as well, if you'd like.
Well, I think one example would be the program that I'm working with this summer. We are trying to recruit a minimum of 12 students to attend a 4-week program to study leadership studies in Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic. And in the past 3 years, the program has been canceled every time, not because of a lack of student interest that we could recruit, but for the fact that students could not afford the fees that were upfront and that they would incur over the duration of the trip. Currently, we have 26 students that are interested, but as I go out and recruit as a student representative, I sit down and have personal conversations with each one, and when they realize the financial burden that they'll incur, they're not able to commit fully to the trip, and then we have to be creative about finding fees because our scholarship funds are so limited and competitive.
Let me just add that the past year we distributed about $113,000 in scholarships. We do have $1 million passport scholarship endowment at the University of South Florida, but as you might imagine, that's yielding less than $50,000 in scholarships. To have a meaningful impact across our student body, it's going to take more than private gifts, and we're continuing to seek additional gifts to the university to support our endowment. Our students have done a remarkably good job in competing, Governor Franklin, in much the same way that you've done a great job in competing for competitive grants or scholarships that will allow you to spend time overseas. We have a number of Gilman scholars funded by the U.S. Department of Education. We have a number of Fulbrights that are student Fulbrights that are annually funded. But again, those are limited. Very, very competitive, and we do well in that competition. But if we're going to have the breadth of impact that we have set for ourselves as a bold ambition at the University of South Florida, we need additional resources to offset these costs.
You got a follow-up, Governor Franklin?
Yeah. And so then currently, the only way that the University of South Florida is able to fund students to participate in these myriad of opportunities is through that endowment you spoke of, and then the grants or the awards that students are able to currently receive?
Yes.
And those are the only two current funding models that you...
Well, of course, there's available need-based and merit-based awards that they could apply equally at home as overseas. So it's not the full extent, but in covering or offsetting the additional costs of study abroad, yes, we're dependent upon operating in endowed private gifts to support those costs, as well as competitive awards.
Governor Root.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I think that the concept of study abroad is tremendous, and I think that it's important, and we should try to find ways to increase our students' opportunities to study abroad. When I went to college, I was one of those students that couldn't afford to study abroad. And I would have loved to have scholarship opportunities to study abroad. But I still go back to kind of the philosophical question, and that is, do we charge 100% of the students for the benefit of 4 students. For 4% are going to take advantage of it. You mentioned that times are tough, and the reason that people can't pay is they don't have the resources. And times are tough, and the people that come to me and say, please don't increase the tuition because we're one of the few that pay it, they're not here. They're relying on us to watch the budget. And, I commend you for what you're doing. Personally, I'm concerned that we keep adding $10 at a time, $10 here, $10 there, and before we know it, we've just got this tuition creep. And, I think we've done a remarkable job in Florida providing a tremendous value, and it's opened up education to a lot of people that otherwise would not have been able to afford it. So I commend you for what you're doing. I think the goal is very noble. I'm just troubled by the concept of everyone paying into this fund.
Thanks, Governor.
Governor Rood, can I, and may I
Certainly.
respond very
Ralph,
briefly, because I certainly appreciate the concern. Of course, this is all about providing those students that don't currently have the opportunity, the possibility of availing themselves of those opportunities. It's quite clear that, as I pointed out earlier, we have a number of fees across all of our universities where all students pay and few students avail themselves of the opportunity. Athletics, I think, is a good example. Health fees, even our financial aid fee, which is intended, we intend that all students pay to provide those students that can't afford the opportunity for a quality higher education. Fundamentally, that's what we're looking at here, extending or creating primarily a need-based pool of dollars to provide, and you've seen it, 81% of students studying abroad are white. We're not getting men. Ryan's an exception. We only get 35% of those students studying abroad are men. That's problematic for the future competitivity of not just the United States, but the state of Florida as well, and we've got to do something about it.
May I follow up?
Governor, let me just point out, I feel like we're studying abroad in Iceland. It's freezing in here. Is there anything we could do about it?
I should mention that my daughter goes to school in Georgia, and she's one of the females that added to the 6% in Georgia. And I was shocked at what we had to pay. And my deal with her was she saved up half of it, I save up half, I'd contribute half, and she went. But I think that if you look at the others, this is a real dramatic ratio. I don't know what your goal is, but if you compare to Florida at 4% year one, so I'm assuming your goal is around 4%. I would think that a health fee, for example, that there's a larger percentage than 1 to 4% that benefit from that, or potentially benefit from it. Theoretically, athletics, there's a benefit to the entire university through a variety of areas. So it's the percentage. Not every fee will benefit 100% of the students. As I looked at this, I would think this would be a wonderful thing for a foundation to take on, raising money specifically. And we're a country of immigrants, and I would think that immigrants that have, want to retain a world view would support endowment where scholarships could be funded for this type of travel. But that's just, my perspective on it. I applaud what your goal here, and it's great to have so many students in support of it.
Thank you, Governor. Other questions? If not, I've got a few. Dr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of comments. I found myself endorsing most of what Governor Rood said. First of all, his enthusiastic endorsement of the program, I think, was commendable. He expressed some concerns about the relatively small number of students who participate in the program that's paid for by all students. But as the provost has said, that's not uncommon in our budgets all across the universities. We charge athletics, for one example. Fees are paid by all students for the benefit of some smaller number. But that's a principle I think we've pretty well established, and it doesn't bother me that we are adding one more program to be supported by all students that all students do not participate in. All students have the opportunity to participate in, And I think that's the important thing. And I do think that the breadth of experience that students have from international travel, international experience, educational experiences, adds something to the general university's decorum. I really think it adds some breadth and quality to the overall university, having students study abroad and then come back home and relate those experiences. I was intrigued, maybe the word is alarmed, however, by the relatively small number of females who participate. And you mentioned that, Mr. Provost, and you may have talked about how you're going to address it. If you did, I missed that. But do you have any thoughts at all about how some greater balance can be brought to this serious imbalance?
Actually, unless I misrepresented myself, the challenge we have is with males. 81% of students studying abroad are females today.
I noticed that.
So it's,
yeah.
no, I'm sorry, 65%. 81% are white. At the University of South Florida, last year we had 810 students that studied abroad out of 47,000 students. A small number. Our goal is to climb to 5% from 1%. Governor Rood, our foundation is deeply committed to raising funds, but the reality is we're not going to be able to raise those funds fast enough to impact our students in ways that they and their future employers want their lives impacted. But Governor Marshall, I think clearly what we're finding and engaging male students in higher education and student success today isn't limited to study abroad. The exciting thing about study abroad is that research suggests that students who have participated in study abroad are much more successful, both in persisting and advancing on a path to graduation. Their grade point average, and Ryan, I'm sure, will attest to this, their grade point average tends to be significantly higher than those students that didn't participate in study abroad. So, yes, our focus will be on engaging more male students, students of color, and students who are Pell recipients that do not have the discretionary, or whose parents don't have the discretionary income to offset those additional costs. It's, again, all about opportunity.
Governor Beard.
Yes, Ralph, let me ask a couple of questions. How will you determine whether this fee is really successful, first of all? And secondly, how many years or months, years would it take to generate enough cash to really be able for the students to use? Will it be the first year, or will it be beyond that?
Can I take the second question first? And in effect, we project at $10 per semester per head, raising in, and in the first instance, it will only be implemented on the Tampa campus, not the 3 regional campuses, although our Polytechnic campus is considering implementation beginning fall of 2012. But we project that it will generate somewhere around $1 million that would be immediately pushed out in the form of, again, primarily need-based scholarships to support those students. Now, we haven't determined, and this would be for the student and faculty committee to determine the size of those scholarships, whether it would be 2,000 scholarships at $500 a scholarship, or at some other level. But as you can see, with 810 students enrolled in study abroad last year, whether it's another 1,000 students or 2,000 students, we quickly start to ramp up that level of participation, which, again, we expect will yield incredibly significant returns for our students, for our university community, where students will return with a global perspective, with a global experience to share in the classroom, and so forth. The first question, how do we measure success? Well, very simply stated, the first measure will be the number of students, the growth, and we do not, that's not data that we would simply collect and report ourselves. There is a national, the Institute for International Education annually publishes an open doors report, so we would report on that data to our Board of Trustees and to the Board of Governors. What we would also do is collect data on the gender, the race and ethnicity, the socioeconomic profile of those students to indeed determine whether we are widening participation in ways that we aspire to do.
Thanks. Governor Colson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask the students, when you're looking at all these opportunities for fees, are you also considering at the same time what's getting ready to happen in tuition over the next 2 or 3 years? Because it's the total pot that the families have to look at and you all have to look at. And then as I look at most of the university tuition projections over the next 3 years, they all appear to project a 15% tuition increase. So as you all have approved these, are you also in support of the 15% tuition increases that are projected? Or might we see you here opposing those because it's just getting too expensive to go to college? So,
I'll say a few words. First off, I represent the St. Petersburg campus, and this fee will not be implemented on my campus. It is the responsibility of the leadership of student government of the Tampa campus to have had these discussions, and if they were here today, they would have a much clearer answer for you. But in order for student government, at least at our campus, to support any kind of fee increase, these discussions certainly include, in all discussions, the totality of the fees that we're looking at. So again, I'm speaking on behalf of student governments within the USF system. We have considered these in endorsing these kind of fees, specifically this fee. But again, the USF Tampa folks would be a much better, it's their fee, not my constituencies.
These are Tampa folks.
Okay.
Yes, I'd be happy to address this question. Yes, we students certainly do keep in mind that tuition increases have been rather substantial, and they will continue to be. However, I think that when we consider fees such as the Global Experience fee, it's very worthwhile to consider what effect it would have on the USF Tampa campus. Certainly, the extra investments in upgrading the visibility of our athletics teams have raised USF's stature in national recognition and have helped us really get our name out there. And I think that also investing this fee in increasing our international presence by sending students abroad who can learn abroad and apply their research abroad and then bring contacts back to the state of Florida. I think that it's certainly a worthwhile investment, and it's not as large as the tuition increases which we are facing.
That's for sure.
Mr. Chair, I don't know whether, I'm not a member of the committee, so I apologize for interrupting you. I know I don't get to vote, but I hope
You're always welcome, Mr. Vice Chair.
And Governor Perez, also the student body vice president is actually in Tampa right now, and they could call in for those type of questions as well, just for more of a broad perspective and reference, because
If he chooses to call in, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Governor Franklin, we've allocated 15 minutes per fee.
Okay, well.
And I think we're well past that. We kind of did a half an hour for the two for you. Ralph, I have a couple of questions on this fee. Go ahead.
And the only reason I made that statement is only because I believe 3 or 4 years ago, the student government did support the Global Experience fee. Now I know student government naturally has a high turnover rate, and the current student government, just so that the air is just clear naturally, don't support it for some of the same reasons why Governor Rood had about the disproportionality in reference to the amount of students that are paying the fee and the amount of students that would be participating in the program. So that's the only reason why I brought up the fact that the same question that Governor Colson asked, from a broader perspective, that someone that might not be as close to the issue in reference to being a part of the program kind of expound from more of a bias, I guess, or being involved with the actual issue.
Gotcha. So the current student government does not support it?
Correct, but I think 3 or 4 years ago they did. So
Gotcha.
naturally we have high turnover rate in student government as well.
Okay, thank you. Ralph, I have
Say that again.
what he said was well, go ahead, Governor, right in the microphone.
I didn't hear it.
Sorry, which part, or the entire, everything? Oh, well, 3 or 4 years ago, the USF student government did support this fee, but currently, the student government does not.
Not supporting this fee.
They do not support the fee, but I was talking about high turnover in student government, so naturally, you're going to see that happen throughout the process.
Got it.
I have a couple of questions, Ralph, just for some parameters. You chose, and some of the other universities have too, a per semester fee instead of a per credit hour fee. Will a part-time student, somebody taking 3 hours, they're also paying the $10? So this is just per head, $10, no distinction as to credit hours, correct?
Yes.
Part-time treated the same as full-time, undergrad and graduate?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure of that.
And just on that point, of the 810 students that enrolled last year, there's about the proportional representation of those taking it up. 25% were graduate students, 75% were undergraduate students. That's consistent with the broader profile of the Tampa campus.
Okay, let's go ahead unless someone is compelled. I was going to try to wrap up this piece of the conversation. And since this is the first one we're voting on, I wanted to spend some time, again, laying the filters. When we started, I laid my filters, one of which was, I don't, and I won't, and I can't support this fee. I won't support a fee where all the students pay for a small group. And I understand that we have athletic fees and health fees, but I don't believe those are analogous to this. I think if every student came to you and said, we want to do this, you couldn't meet that capacity by a long shot. So I don't think that analogy works. And as we move forward in fees today and through the upcoming years, at least as I'm looking at them, that is a fairly major filter for me, as it is some of the other ones. Is there, Governor Rube, did you?
Are you ready for motion?
I am ready for motion.
Okay, let me just start by saying that I'm really concerned about these difficult economic times. We all saw what happened with the budget and the types of cuts that were necessary for the state to live within our means. I also get calls from people that are concerned about cost of tuition going up. And even though I support excellence and I do think that our basic tuition, we need to support additional funding for education. I think we need to be very diligent as we look into each of these fees. For those reasons, I don't support the fee, and I'm not exactly sure what the motion should be, but probably something along the lines of that we don't approve the fee and as a result do not move it on to the full board.
There's a motion to not approve the USF global fee. Is there a second?
Let me ask the question. Ralph, are you prepared to try this fee for a year or two, see whether you're successful and whether the student body is willing to go change their mind about where this fee would go, or whether they feel good about it or not? And I don't know if that can be done, but I'll just...
Before the answer, I mean, I think, Governor Beer, that's a fair question. But I think as we're deciding, this is one of those thresholds, what kind of fees are we going to support, what are we not going to support lines. And Ralph's answer is going to be, of course we're willing to try this for a year or two and come back and revisit. I mean, if not, that's got to be his answer.
Well, it does, if I may, it gets to Governor Franklin's comment earlier. I think if I could project the way student government from year to year thought and acted, life would be a lot easier. Recall that we would not have even contemplated bringing this fee to our Board of Trustees had it not grown out of a recommendation from a student committee 2 years ago. The fact that student government hasn't thrown its support behind it this year, I think is as much indicative of the platform of the current President and Vice President of Student Government as the merits or lack thereof of the particular program. My answer, quite straightforwardly, to Governor Beard would be absolutely. We'd welcome the opportunity to pilot this with the understanding that we would bring it back for further consideration by the Board of Governors in whatever period of time you saw fit to demonstrate the worth and the impact of this on student opportunity at the University of South Florida.
And again, I think that's why today's actions are so important. We will lay the groundwork today for what types of fees we will approve in the future, what we won't approve in the future, and whether or not USF brings it back in 2 years. If it is the will of the committee to support fees that feed the many, to support the few, great. But if we do this year, we will continue to see these fees. Next year, we'll have a bevy of these fees and be unable to work through the process of saying, well, now you've got every student supporting 30 students. And so I think we need to lay that predicate. And again, this is a difficult year for many of the universities coming forward because we're figuring out where we go as a board. But I think this one is one of the threshold decisions. There's a motion to not accept the fee increase. Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. There is a second.
Yeah.
Governor Franklin, there is a second. Is there any additional discussion beyond what we have just had on this?
I have one comment, Mr.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the only comment, and it kind of goes to your last statement, and that I do believe that we are kind of setting some guidelines, either intentionally or unintentionally, because this is our first time doing this. But I also would like to think that often our decisions may be impacted, by the economy or what may be, happening generally. So I'm not so sure that that by voting this particular fee up or down, that we may be willing to send the second message of, we don't want a fee that may support a smaller group. It may just be that based upon the conditions just within the system and within the state right now, that this may not be the best recommendation. So I just want to add that as a second thought too, and I'm not saying that I disagree with your comment as much as just a second comment, that it may be that the economy may have something to do with a decision like this, and not just the fact that it's a fee that may not benefit a larger percentage of the university. So think about that as you're presenting different.
And as we started, I laid out that one of my filters was, is it the whole paying for a small group? There are obviously other filters as well. There's a motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman, a procedural question. If this motion is defeated, what will our procedure be?
Our recommendation then to the board, we're not a final arbiter here, Governor Marshall. We will make the recommendation to the board we will say that this was struck at this level. If the board concurs, then the university would have an opportunity to appeal to the appeals committee within 5 days of our rejection, if that rejection survives the meeting of the 17th, and then within 10 days the appeals committee would meet and review. So there is still a remaining process.
Mr. Chairman, just a fine point on that, and I think you've explained it, but all of these will go to the full Board of Governors next week for the conference call, and will either reflect a positive recommendation or a negative vote by the committee. And then the full board, working through the chair and the committee, would have to take each of these up and vote on them appropriately. What you are doing is forwarding with it a recommendation to the full board one way or the other, if that helps.
Great. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I think particularly for what we're doing today, roll call votes are going to be appropriate. So Mikey, would you please call the roll?
Okay, this is as to voting against the USF Global Experience fee. Ms. Duncan? Okay.
We've lost her.
We lost her.
Okay.
Mr. Franklin?
For.
For
No.
voting against?
All right.
Okay.
That's how it.
So just for the motion.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Mr. Hosseini?
Not there.
Okay. Dr. Marshall?
Opposed.
You're opposed. Okay. Mr. Rude?
For.
Okay. Mr. Tripp?
4.
Okay. Mr. Vice Chair Beard?
4.
Mr. Chair, the vote is successful to not approve the USF Global Experience fee.
4 to 1.
4 to 1.
Thank you, Mikey.